Markets globally have been thrown into a turmoil by the financial stress facing Chinese real estate developer Evergrande, and many are already referring to this as China's Lehman moment. So, what are the implications of all this on Indian markets? Evergrande, China's second largest real estate developer, is saddled with more than $300 billion in liabilities, which is equivalent to 2% of China's gross domestic product. The property player is scrambling to raise funds to pay its many lenders and suppliers to prevent a liquidity crisis from tipping it into a collapse. For now, analysts see the development as a country-specific issue with very low probability of a global contagion.
2-3 points which I can give you. First is that Evergrande is not a bank, so the linkages will not be as widespread as a bank has, which is a financial entity. It has many linkages within the financial system. Secondly, I think it's much larger in size than what we had events earlier. So that's why there is more tension or there is more nervousness about this event. Third point is that China has been trying to strike a balance between what they are calling financial speculation. They are trying to curb that to some extent, and secondly, they are also on the other hand trying to not let the financial system suffer a lot. Striking a balance between these two is not easy. At one point, if one of the institutions actually defaults, it creates a ripple effect or a domino effect, which can go to the other markets. So there is this fine balance whether which side it will tilt is anybody's guess. I don't have an answer to that, but certainly the size of the problem is large. So what is the prescription? I think the prescription is to be a little more careful, look at the event more holistically.
While analysts do believe Evergrande could experience a credit event this week, they attach higher probability to the company seeking restructuring rather than an all-out liquidation. That is because China's property sector accounts for 29% of its GDP, and the collapse of Evergrande, should that happen, would impair the whole sector and prove a setback to a post-pandemic economic recovery. An analysis by Invesco shows that China's total banking system had loans worth around 159 trillion renminbi as of the second quarter of 2021. These included 12 trillion worth of real estate development loans and around 37 trillion in mortgages. The total debt exposure for Evergrande in the first half of 2021 was 834 billion renminbi, 634 billion of that in loans and 200 billion in offshore bonds and other debt. This means that Evergrande's debt is roughly 2 to 3% of Chinese banks' core Tier 1 capital, which was around 18.5 trillion as of the end of the second quarter. Certain banks have more exposure to Evergrande than others. China's Big Four state-owned banks' exposure is between 2 and 5.5% of their total loans. Thus, even in a worst-case scenario, any default on Evergrande's part would not result in a loss of confidence in the banking system. If at all Evergrande goes into liquidation, the global spillover could hit the world in 3 ways: sentimental hit in real estate market, forex impact, and liquidity distortions. So what will be the impact on India? According to Joydeep Sen, an independent market analyst tracking bond markets, China is expected to bail out Evergrande as there is a lot at stake. But if China doesn't step in, given that it is tightening regulatory screws on private players, we may see a global financial crisis-like situation. However, the extent is difficult to assess right now. As regards India, Sen believes the country's financial system is better placed to manage any systemic risk arising out of Evergrande's failure, even though he doesn't rule out a sell-off in the equity markets and a rise in bond yields. The impact, he says, will be contained. Abhishek Goenka, founder and CEO of IFA Global, says while Evergrande's default may have an impact on emerging market high-yield space, we do not see it spilling over Indian government bonds as much. what should investors watch out for? Going forward, investors should be closely watching a few developments. Firstly, the company's coupon payments, which are due on the 23rd and 29th of September and 11th of October. Second, recovery in the Chinese property market. Though the recent property market weakness is expected to continue, Invesco doesn't think the government would respond with any broad-scale easing. That is mostly because the market has done quite well this year. Property investments year to date are still around 11% higher than last year, and property sales are around 16% more. Lastly, any default in Chinese bond markets. Currently, both onshore and offshore Chinese bond defaults remain elevated due to stricter property market measures and officials showing a higher tolerance for Chinese companies to restructure their weaker debt. That said, it's unlikely that policymakers would permit a widespread default scenario, since this would bring systemic and unmitigated risk to the financial system.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.